Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The porcelain vase shattered against the wall, sending shards of Ming Dynasty history flying like shrapnel, but Julian didn't flinch. "Get out," the man in the shadows snarled, his voice a low rumble of thunder that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Take your baggage and leave my house before I have security throw you off the cliffside." Julian Thorne tightened his grip on the small, trembling hand of his own son, Oliver, who was hiding behind his leg. Most men would have run. Most men would have withered under the murderous glare of Cassian Vane, the ruthless patriarch of the Vane Syndicate and the city's most feared tycoon. But Julian wasn't most men. He was desperate, he was cornered, and he was a father. "No," Julian said, his voice soft but cutting through the tension like a razor wire. He stepped forward, crushing a piece of priceless porcelain under his worn sneaker. "I won't leave. Not until you look at him. Really look at him." He pointed to the other child in the room, Cassian's son, Elian, who was curled in a ball amidst the wreckage, screaming silently, waiting for the punishment that never came. "You can fire me, Mr. Vane. You can ruin me. But if you throw me out tonight, you are admitting that a terrified 5-year-old has defeated the king of the city. Is that the headline you want?" Cassian stepped into the light. He was a monolith of a man, 6'3" of tailored charcoal wool and raw, predatory aggression. His eyes were the color of cold steel, and for the first time in years, they narrowed not in boredom, but in genuine, dangerous curiosity. "You have a death wish, Mr. Thorne," Cassian whispered, closing the distance between them. "I have a mortgage and 2 children to feed," Julian countered, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Fear is a luxury I can't afford." 3 weeks earlier, Julian had been staring at an eviction notice. Life as a single father to a 4-year-old was a constant act of juggling chainsaws. Since his wife passed, Julian had drifted from job to job, his soft nature often chewed up by the harsh realities of the corporate world. He was too gentle, too patient, too unwilling to step on others to climb the ladder. But when the agency called about a high-risk, high-reward placement, he didn't hesitate. The Vane estate sat on a jagged promontory overlooking the gray, churning ocean. It was a fortress of glass and black stone, cold and imposing. The rumors about Cassian Vane were legendary, a man with mafia ties, a widower who ruled his business empire with an iron fist, and a father who had driven away 15 nannies in 6 months. His son, Elian, was labeled unmanageable, a monster in miniature. When Julian arrived for the interview, he had made a mistake, a catastrophic one. His babysitter had canceled last minute. With no other option, he had strapped Oliver into the back seat of his rusted sedan and brought him along, intending to leave him with a tablet in the waiting room. Instead, the security team had ushered them both into the main hall. The interview hadn't been with HR. It had been with Cassian Vane himself. The man sat behind a desk that cost more than Julian's life earnings, reading a dossier. He didn't look up when Julian entered. "You brought a child," Cassian said flatly. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "My son, Oliver," Julian explained, his palms sweating. "Emergency circumstances. He's very quiet. I don't tolerate baggage. Or incompetence." Cassian finally looked up. His face was devastatingly handsome, sharp angles and brooding darkness, but his eyes were dead. "My son is not a playdate. He is a Vane. He requires discipline, structure, and fear. You look like you apologize to furniture when you bump into it." "Discipline without love is just cruelty," Julian blurted out. Cassian's eyes flashed. "And what would you know about my requirements?" "I know that 15 people tried to use fear on your son, and they're gone," Julian said, finding a spine he didn't know he possessed. "Maybe it's time to try something else." Before Cassian could evict him, a crash echoed from the upper landing. A heavy bust of a Roman emperor came tumbling down the grand staircase, shattering at the bottom. At the top of the stairs stood Elian Vane. The boy was small, pale, with wild black hair and eyes as empty as his father's. He held a lighter in his hand, the flame flickering dangerously close to the velvet curtains. Security rushed forward. Cassian stood up, his face darkening with rage. "Elian." But before the guards could reach the boy, Oliver, Julian's son, waddled over to the bottom of the stairs. He held up his favorite stuffed rabbit, a battered thing with one ear. You dropped your rock, Oliver said, pointing at the shattered bust. It broke. Elian froze. He stared at the small, chubby boy in the dinosaur t-shirt. The guards hesitated. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Elian extinguished the lighter. He took a hesitant step down. Then another. He sat on the step, staring at Oliver. It wasn't a rock, Elian whispered, his voice used and hoarse. It was Caesar. Oh, Oliver said. Caesar is broken. Do you want the bunny? Cashin watched, stunned. For the first time in months, Elian wasn't screaming. He wasn't biting. He was engaging. Cashin turned his gaze back to Julian. The air crackled with a shift in power. You're hired, Cashin said, his voice clipped. You live in. Both of you. But if your son becomes a distraction, or if you fail to control mine, you'll wish you had never stepped foot on this mountain. Living in the Vane estate was like living inside a glacier. The temperature was always set to a chill, the silence was oppressive, and the staff moved like ghosts, terrified of disturbing the master. Julian's strategy was simple but radical. He treated Elian exactly the same way he treated Oliver. He didn't flinch at the tantrums. When Elian threw his dinner on the floor, Julian didn't yell. He simply sat on the floor with Oliver and ate his own sandwich, chatting about cartoons, ignoring the sulking air until Elian's hunger won out and he joined them. It was a slow, painful process. Elian tested him constantly. He hid Julian's phone. He cut holes in Julian's sweaters. But Julian never retaliated. He offered warmth where there was cold, patience where there was anger. But the real challenge wasn't the son. It was the father. Cashin Vane was a ghost in his own home. He worked 18 hours a day, fueled by espresso and ruthlessness. He avoided Elian as if the boy were a contagious disease. One stormy Tuesday, Julian decided he had had enough. He found Cashin in the library, brooding over blueprints for a new casino. The air smelled of rain and expensive scotch. He needs you to tuck him in, Julian said from the doorway. Cashin didn't look up. That's what I pay you for. You pay me to keep him safe and fed. You can't outsource fatherhood, Cashin. It was the first time Julian had used his first name. Cashin's head snapped up. The pen in his hand snapped in half. Excuse me. He drew a picture today. It's of you. Julian walked into the room, placing a crumpled piece of paper on the mahogany desk. It was a crude crayon drawing of a large black blob and a small black blob, separated by a red line. He thinks you hate him because his mother died giving birth to him. The silence that followed was deafening. Cashin stood up slowly, unfolding his massive frame. He walked around the desk, backing Julian against the towering bookshelves. The scent of sandalwood and danger enveloped Julian, making his breath hitch. You have dug into my past, Cashin murmured, placing a hand on the shelf by Julian's head, boxing him in. I should fire you for insubordination. Is it true? Julian asked, his voice trembling but his gaze steady. He looked up into those storm-gray eyes. Do you blame him? I don't blame him, Cashin said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, his face inches from Julian's. I look at him, and I see her. And it hurts. It hurts so much I can't breathe. It was a confession ripped from the chest of a man who hadn't felt anything but anger for 5 years. Julian's heart ached. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers brushing the back of Cashin's hand on the shelf. Pain is evidence that you loved, Julian whispered. Don't let that pain become a wall. Let it be a bridge. He misses her too, even if he never knew her. Cashin stared at Julian. He looked at the soft curve of Julian's jaw, the kindness in his hazel eyes, the defiance that kept him standing there despite the aura of danger Cashin projected. For a moment, the alpha mask slipped. Cashin leaned in, his gaze dropping to Julian's lips. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a magnetic pull that terrified them both. You represent everything I hate, Cashin breathed. Softness, vulnerability, hope. Maybe that's what you need, Julian replied. Cashin pulled back abruptly, the ice slamming back into place. Get out. Before I do something we both regret. The dynamic shifted after that night. The hostility remained, but it was different. It was heated. Cashin started coming home earlier. He would supervise dinner, watching with intense, brooding eyes as Julian wrangled the two boys. He watched as Julian laughed, wiping spaghetti sauce off Elian's face. He watched how Julian's hands moved, gentle and assured. He watched the way his own son, the monster, leaned into Julian's touch, starving for affection. And he watched Julian. He noticed the way Julian's shirts were frayed at the cuffs. He noticed the dark circles under his eyes. One evening, Julian returned to his room to find a box on his bed. Inside were 5 tailored suits, soft cashmere sweaters, and a new tablet. There was no note. Just the receipt from the city's most expensive boutique, paid by the Vane Corporation. When Julian confronted him in the hallway, holding a cashmere sweater like it was a live grenade, Cashin didn't stop walking. It reflects poorly on me if my staff dresses like vagrants, Cashin said, not meeting his eyes. Thank you, Julian said softly. Cashin paused. His jaw worked. Elian laughed today. I heard him from the office. He likes Oliver's jokes, Julian said. No. Cashin turned, his gaze intense. He likes you. You've done the impossible, Julian. You've tamed the wolf cub. He's not a wolf, Cashin. He's just a boy. And what am I? Cashin stepped closer, the hallway feeling suddenly very narrow. Am I just a man? You're a man who is afraid to be happy, Julian said. Cashin reached out, his large, rough hand cupping Julian's cheek. The touch was shocking, electric. Julian leaned into it instinctively. You make me want things I cannot have. Things that make me weak. Love doesn't make you weak, Julian whispered. In my world, it gets you killed. The threat came 3 days later. It wasn't a business rival. It was worse. It was Cashin's estranged brother, Marcus, a man cut out of the will, bitter and drowning in gambling debts. It was a Saturday. Cashin was away at a shareholder meeting. Julian had taken Elian and Oliver to the estate's private greenhouse. The rain was lashing against the glass roof, creating a cozy, humid world of ferns and orchids. The doors burst open. 3 men in masks entered, led by a man with a manic grin and a heavy pistol. Where is the little prince? Marcus shouted, scanning the greenery. Julian's instinct screamed. He grabbed both boys, shoving them behind a dense row of potting tables. Stay down, he hissed. Do not make a sound. Oliver, hold Elian's hand. Julian stood up, grabbing a heavy gardening shears. He wasn't a fighter. He was a nanny. But looking at the terrified eyes of the boys, a primal, ferocious protectiveness surged through him. Who are you? Julian called out, stepping into the aisle to draw their attention. The help? Marcus sneered. Where's the kid? I need leverage, and I need it now. He's not here. Julian lied, his voice shaking but loud. He's with his father. Liar. Marcus raised the gun. Check the rows. Julian didn't wait. He threw a clay pot, smashing it against the nearest gunman's head, and ran in the opposite direction of the boys. Run, he screamed to the children. Run to the house. He drew the fire. He drew the wolves away from the lambs. A gunshot shattered the glass roof. Rain poured in. Julian felt a searing pain graze his ribs, knocking him to the muddy floor. Marcus stood over him, the gun pointed at his forehead. Useless sacrifice, Marcus spat. I'll find them. The greenhouse doors exploded inward. It wasn't the police. It was Cashin. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a demon unearthed from the deepest circle of hell. He was soaked, his suit ruined, a silver handgun in his grip. He didn't speak. He fired. 2 shots. 2 men dropped. Marcus spun around, using Julian as a human shield, pressing the barrel into Julian's temple. Back off, brother. Or the nanny paints the orchids red. Cashin froze. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild. He looked at Julian, at the blood-soaking Julian's white shirt, at the terror in his eyes. And in that moment, the icy facade of Cashin Vane shattered completely. Let him go, Cashin said, his voice a guttural growl that didn't sound human. And I will let you live. You care about this one? Marcus laughed nervously. The great Cashin Vane. Weak for a servant? He is not a servant, Cashin snarled. He is mine. The declaration hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Elian, Cashin shouted suddenly, his eyes flicking to the side. Marcus flinched, distracted for a fraction of a second. That was all Julian needed. He jammed the gardening shears into Marcus's thigh. Marcus screamed, the gun firing wild into the ceiling. Julian rolled away. A split second later, a single shot rang out from Cashin's gun. Marcus collapsed, clutching his shoulder, neutralized. Cashin was across the room in a heartbeat. He dropped to his knees in the mud, ignoring his writhing brother, ignoring the security team finally swarming in. He pulled Julian into his arms, his hands frantically checking the wound on Julian's ribs. "Julian," he gasped, his composure gone. "Julian, look at me. I'm okay," Julian wheezed, wincing. "Just a graze. The boys. They're safe. They're with security." Cashin pressed his forehead against Julian's, his body shaking. "You idiot. You reckless, beautiful idiot. You could have died. I had to protect them," Julian whispered. "I told you love gets you killed." Cashin choked out, pulling Julian tighter against his chest, staining his expensive suit with mud and blood. "No." Julian smiled weakly, lifting a hand to touch Cashin's wet hair. "Love is the only reason we survive." The aftermath was a blur of police lights and paramedics. But the silence in the Vane estate was gone. 2 weeks later, Julian was sitting on the terrace, watching the sunset. His side was bandaged, healing well. Oliver and Elian were playing on the lawn. Actually playing, chasing each other with plastic swords. The glass door slid open. Cashin stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, clothes that made him look younger, softer. He handed Julian a glass of wine and sat down next to him. Not across from him. Next to him. "The lawyers finished the paperwork," Cashin said. "Marcus is in custody. The press is being handled. And my job?" Julian asked, looking at his wine. "Now that the danger is over, do you still need a live-in nanny?" Cashin turned to him. The sun caught the sharp angles of his face, but the eyes, the obsidian eyes, were warm. "Elian asked me this morning if you were going to be his other dad," Cashin said. Julian choked on his wine. "He what?" "I told him that was a complicated question," Cashin continued smoothly. He reached out, taking Julian's hand, interlacing their fingers. "But I realized, it's not complicated at all. Cashin, I don't need a nanny, Julian. I have plenty of staff. What I need is you. I need the man who stood up to me. The man who taught my son to laugh again. The man who bled to protect my family." Cashin raised Julian's hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles with a reverence that made Julian's heart stop. "I don't want you to work for me. I want you to stand beside me. You're the alpha," Julian teased, tears pricking his eyes. "You don't do partners." "For you," Cashin murmured, leaning in, "I will rewrite every rule I have." He kissed Julian then. It wasn't the tentative, accidental closeness of the library. It was possessive, deep, and searingly hot. A promise of protection, a claim of ownership, and a surrender all at once. It tasted of wine and rain and a future that didn't have to be lonely. When they broke apart, breathless, the sound of the boys laughing drifted up from the lawn. "Stay," Cashin whispered against his lips. "Be a father to him. Let me be a father to Oliver. Let us be us." Julian looked at the man who had once terrified him, seeing only the love that had bloomed in the cracks of a broken heart. "Okay," Julian whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." And that is how the gentle Nanny tamed the ruthless king. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the mighty Cashin Vane to his knees with nothing but kindness, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, do you believe a person can truly change for love? Or was Cashin just waiting for the right person to unlock his heart? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, yaoi, man 1. Cashin Vane, tall, broad shoulders, wearing unbuttoned black dress shirt soaked in rain, sharp jawline, intense protective expression, dark hair wet and messy, holding a silver gun loosely at side, kneeling on muddy ground. Man 2. Julian Thorne, smaller frame, wearing white shirt stained with blood and mud, leaning against man 1, soft features, hazel eyes looking up with relief, hand touching man 1's face. Background is shattered glass greenhouse, rain pouring in, exotic plants, dramatic blue and orange lighting, emotional atmosphere, cinematic composition, intricate details, sharp focus.